So now we're going to move to Rinku Sen, who is President and Executive Director of the Applied Research Center and publisher of Color Lines magazine, and she's a leading figure in the racial justice movement. And we're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. Linda, I just can't imagine that you have so many things to hold in your brain that it would be impossible for you to forget my bio. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. We've been, the Applied Research Center and NCRW have been for several years trying to figure out how to be in the same space together, and this is a great start to that process, and I'm looking forward to much, much more. At the Applied Research Center, what we do is racial justice work. We're a racial justice think tank, and we think of ourselves as a kind of multi-home for people who care about racial justice, multidisciplinary, multiracial, multi-generational, and all the other multis you could think of. And what we see as our goal now in this period is to popularize racial justice solutions and to prepare people to fight for them. And we largely do that by telling the stories of everyday people set in the context of the structures that shape their lives. And that's a strategy we've chosen very particular to this political moment, including the popularizing and the storytelling, as well as the structural focus. But where I want to start, actually, in thinking about the landscape is with my own emotional state. And I just wonder if anyone else experiences this thing where in the course of one day, 24 hours, I will probably have something in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 mood swings that relate to activity coming out of the administration or going into the administration. And during the election, I had the same 5 or 6 mood swings every day. I need to be on drugs, clearly. But rather than the drugs, I've decided just to struggle with it and deal. And the reason that my mood goes up and down so much is that we do have this enormous political opening. I think the biggest one, certainly in 30 or 40 years, and possibly in 60 years. And who knows, possibly ever, and so I feel tremendous optimism, and in fact, I feel a lot of pride for having run an election the way we did and having the results of the election the way we did. For once, for the first time really in my political lifetime, my adult lifetime, I saw Americans actually vote in their own self-interest, put aside their racial ideas in order to advance their economic needs, their need for peace, their need for community, their need for unity. And then my mood swings when I remember how difficult a fight that was. That wasn't like, Barack Obama decided to run for president and we just all rushed ahead. And it certainly wasn't, once he became the nominee, it certainly wasn't a fight that was devoid of racist stereotyping, of race baiting and racialized attacks at really every day. And if any of you know people who worked on the election or did so yourselves, you know that when we knocked on doors, very often the first piece of the conversation was, no, he's actually not a Muslim, and yes, he is an American, and really there would be nothing wrong if he was a Muslim American, and hey, let's look at the platform. So it's very easy to forget now in the post-election triumphalism that this was a hard-won fight, and that it was a fight that required a great deal of popular education having to take place about racism, how it works, and what it prevents us from doing as a country. So the challenge now that we have elected our first president of color is that it's very easy for Americans to forget that racism actually still exists. And it's even easier for them to forget, if they ever knew, that racism is structural, that the racial divide, the attitudes that people have that keep us separated from each other, that create racial animosity and competition, that create a racial hierarchy that's assumed now. People don't even blink an eye when they walk into a restaurant and see all white people at the front of the house and only brown people at the back of the house. That those things are created by both the written rules and the unwritten rules of our society, those attitudes, those relationships. And it's going to be not possible for us to focus on continuing to close the racial divide without an explicit and specific focus on what causes the racial divide. So my concern today, what causes my mood swings around the administration, is that we have a president who has chosen a largely universal approach, certainly with regard to race. So while I respect very much the major speeches he's given about racism in the country and how it works, and the ways in which he's made appointments, and I see lots of things to be happy about, but the thing that concerns me is that most often he takes a lift all boats, rising tide approach to change. And communities of color, as we know from the history of the Roosevelt moment, have been left behind many, many times in other recoveries, the recovery from the Great Depression, the recovery from World War II, et cetera. So the story that America is now telling itself about race, I think, is this. It is individual. It takes place between person and person. It is intentional. It's about, having a conscious animosity toward people of another color, and that we've done all we can. We passed civil rights laws that make intentional individual racism illegal. And so if people are still there, that means we have to talk them out of it in a one-on-one kind of way and wait for their behavior to change, and maybe the next generation will do it. I'm getting ready to wrap up right now. So to change that story so that we can get to the structural changes that we need to make in order to close that racial divide, people who care about racial justice, who are scholars, who are activists, also need to change some key parts of the story that we are telling. So the story that we are telling needs to include a couple of key ideas. One is that racial justice is the key to an inclusive, effective, unified society. We're not going to be that society unless we have racial justice. Two is that racial justice helps to make things better for everybody. I hope we'll be able to talk more about how that works during the panel. And we can only tell those stories if we are willing to be explicit and specific about our racial justice commitments and about our racial justice analysis, whether we're looking at cultural institutions or economic institutions or political institutions. Thanks so much.